The lake shimmered that morning, reflecting the fresh hues of dawn, as if the world had dipped a brush into its palette and painted the scene. Just for me, I stood at the edge of my property, where the grass met the gritty sand of the private beach, savoring the tranquil solitude. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. My boat, a modest craft, bobbed lazily in the water at the dock, waiting patiently for its next journey. In our community, the lake was more than just a body of water. It was life distilled into a clear, reflective surface. It provided solace, recreation, and a sense of shared privilege among those who lived beside its banks. But not everyone saw it that way. Some peered at it through a lens of rules and regulations, their vision clouded by the need to assert control. Karen was one of those people. Her presence was known by the sharp tick of her heels on the pavement and the clipped assessing gaze she cast over everything within her domain. The HOA, her scepter of authority, gave her a stage upon which to perform her acts of vigilant observation and petty enforcement. She was the self-appointed custodian of our community's aesthetic, always poised to pounce on any perceived indiscretion. It started with a note left on my door with the neat precision of a schoolmarm's handwriting, a missive of sorts wrapped in the guise of neighborly concern, but weighed down by the cloying tone of officiousness. "Please remove your boat by Tuesday," it read, "or it will be towed at your expense." I let the paper linger for a moment longer between my fingers before setting it aside. A small smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. The irony was almost poetic. Karen had forgotten, or perhaps never bothered to learn the boundaries of true ownership. Her note was a pebble dropped in the vast expanse of my lake, causing ripples that dissipated before reaching the other shore. I had always believed in quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to be paraded or brandished like a weapon. My connection to the lake wasn't just a matter of legal papers. It was a bond forged over years of stewardship and respect for the natural world. The next few days unfolded with the predictability of a well-rehearsed script. Karen's footsteps became a familiar rhythm as she passed by, eyes narrowing each time they skimmed over my boat. Her frustration was tangible, a palpable tension in the air. Yet I remained content with my silent watch over the scene. There was no need to rush into words or confrontations. Instead, I took to the lake one early morning, the mist rising in delicate curls around the boat. As I navigated towards the center, I paused there, embracing the stillness that wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. From here, the shores seemed distant, the world reduced to just the gentle cradle of the water and the soft rustle of leaves. This was my sanctuary, my piece of the earth, and it was mine to share, to protect and to cherish regardless of any misplaced edict or arbitrary decree. I returned to shore with renewed resolve, leaving behind a trail of gentle ripples on the surface. Karen's actions were a challenge, certainly, but one I met with the quiet assurance that comes from understanding the deeper truths beneath the superficial layers. I had no doubt that her campaign would escalate, driven by the unwavering conviction of her own righteousness. Yet the lake and I would remain unmoved, immutable, a testament to the power of nature and the folly of those who attempt to harness it for their own ends. Karen's crusade against my boat had transformed from an early morning annoyance into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. Her sense of righteousness, I imagined, must have felt like a beacon in our community, shining light on those she deemed offenders of some unwritten suburban code. Yet, as the days passed, her campaign grew increasingly absurd, like a misguided quest for justice that had long lost its way. Each morning began with a new love letter from the HOA slid discreetly under my door. The envelope's official seal, an almost comical juxtaposition to its contents. Citations for noise disturbances, alleged safety hazards, and even violations of non-existent dress codes cluttered my table. The ink barely dry. These documents were Karen's attempt to entangle me in a web of petty regulations, each thread spun from the yarn of her imagination. The absurdity of it all didn't escape me. Last Tuesday she cited me for a lawn decor violation, an offense apparently due to the weathered garden gnome that had graced my front yard since before she moved into the neighborhood. His benign grin now a silent protest against the tyranny of conformity. I chuckled to myself, wondering if Karen would have cited the Mona Lisa for a breach of the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. Beyond the paper trail, Karen wielded gossip like a weapon, her tongue sharper than any administrative penalty. Whispers took root in the ears of my neighbors, sprouting into a thicket of mistrust. I could feel the shift in the air, conversations halting as I approached eyes that once held warmth, now averted or narrowed with suspicion. Karen's narrative spread like wildfire, fueled more by her determination than any kernel of truth. I found myself at odds with a community I had long called home, a surreal play where the audience had been turned against me by a self-appointed director. I remained the silent actor navigating the stage with measured steps, my lines unsaid, my actions quiet yet deliberate. As Karen's campaign escalated, so did the absurdity. I received a notice for a boat safety course I'd supposedly failed to attend, ironic, considering the lake was mine, and therein lay the quiet power she couldn't see, a fact obscured by her myopic vision where she saw only the surface of things. Never the depths. I held the cards in this unintentional game, yet I found no satisfaction in the prospect of playing them. Instead, I watched, waiting for the moment when realization would dawn upon her, as inevitable as the tide she sought to control. In the meantime, I continued my quiet existence, tending to my yard, polishing the boat, waving at neighbors who would rather pretend I wasn't there. It became a test of endurance, not of strength, but of patience. The lake remained serene, an expanse of calm, amidst the chaos, its waters reflecting the sky's indifferent azure, a reminder that nature cares little for human folly. And so, I waited the lake's owner and its steward, standing resolute in the face of Karen's storm, knowing that, like all tempests, it would eventually pass, leaving only clear skies and the gentle ripples of a story that would soon fade into local lore. The first light of dawn cast a silvery sheen over the lake, transforming its surface into a sprawling mirror of tranquility. I stood on my porch, coffee cup warm between my hands, watching mist rise and swirl like whispered secrets. The morning was my sanctuary, a time to reflect and gather thoughts before the world intruded with its discord. The events of the past few weeks had unfolded like a tightly wound spiral, each turn bringing Karen closer to an inevitable realization. She was the queen of the HOA, presiding over her domain with the rigid authority of a self-appointed monarch. Her mission was clear: enforce, conformity, stamp out individuality, and above all, preserve a pristine facade. But she hadn't counted on me. Or rather, she hadn't realized that beneath my unassuming exterior lurked the pivotal piece in this suburban chess game. The letter she left on my boat was the spark, a veiled threat wrapped in bureaucratic language, its intent as clear as the waters I loved. Tow it, she'd said, remove the eyesore. I wondered how her carefully curated world would react when they realized my ownership extended beyond the mooring lines to the very lake itself. Quiet power can be profound. Like the lake, it holds depths unseen to the unobservant eye. I'd built this life on such foundations, weaving connections that ran deeper than the surface Karen skimmed with her judgments. I began to document everything. Her visits, the notes, the whispered snipes behind manicured hedges, a ledger of subtle aggressions. Each entry was a brushstroke on the canvas of my counter painted with patience and precision. When she came again, clipboard in hand, I watched her from the window. She stood at the water's edge, a general, surveying a battlefield. Her expression was one of determination, laced with the faintest hint of frustration. How does one control what cannot be controlled? How does one claim dominion over what is already possessed? I stepped out my presence, a ripple in her carefully controlled pool. Her eyes flicked over a hawk's gaze, darting to its prey. But I wasn't prey. I was the lake, and she was about to wade in over her head. Without a word, I gestured to the water, the boat, the ramp, then to the papers, clutched in her hand. A silent conversation, ancient and elemental. Ownership is not merely possession. It is stewardship, the bond formed between a place and a soul. Her mouth opened to fish, gasping for air. It was then I chose to speak just a single line delivered with the weight of inevitability. The lake and the launch are mine. Her silence was delicious, a feast of stunned realization. She turned without a word, the lake behind her, a shimmering testament to quiet sovereignty. In the days that followed, the community's whispers shifted. I became a presence, a narrative woven into the tapestry of the neighborhood lore. Karen's reign over the HOA continued, but now with the understanding that the lake and all it represented was beyond her reach. The mornings returned to serene stillness, the lake undisturbed by the ripples of petty conflict. I stood once more on my porch, coffee cup in hand. As the sun rose, a golden promise of peace. The lake held its secrets, as did I. And Karen, for all her bluster, learned that some things are best left untouched, lest they defy control and slip quietly beyond grasp. The air crackled with tension, like a wire pulled taut. I could feel it weaving through the neighborhood, lurking, whispering. It was a subtle change, one that nestled itself into the corners of conversations and the spaces between glances. The kind of tension that makes ordinary streets feel like fault lines, ready to shift and tip the balance of everyday life into chaos. I watched from my living room window, a quiet observer in the game Karen had unwittingly set in motion. The lake shimmered beyond the trees, its surface an undisturbed mirror reflecting the sky's serene blue. My boat, still in its rightful place, bobbed gently, as if reveling in its newfound notoriety. Whispers of my recent run-in with Karen had begun to spread. The news flowed like water, seeping into the consciousness of the neighborhood. Curious eyes darted towards my property, and gatherings of concern began to form in hushed clusters on sidewalks and driveways. The HOA, usually a bastion of suburban peace, now felt more like a courtroom, its members uncomfortably shifting in their roles as reluctant jurors. Karen's presence was less visible now, though her influence lingered. The vibrant red of her sports car, usually proudly parked at the curb, was conspicuously absent. People noticed that too. It was as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would make the next move in this peculiar standoff. I felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, and their silent alliances forming beneath the surface. Yet beneath their scrutiny, I found a strange sense of calm. Power, I realized, wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was about presence, about knowing when not to tip your hand and when to let others show theirs. A neighbor. John approached me one afternoon. His footsteps crunched along the gravel path, a soft disturbance in the midday stillness. He nodded a silent acknowledgement of the shifting dynamics. He gestured towards the lake, an unspoken question hovering in the air. I met his gaze, letting the silence stretch and settle. "Beautiful day," he remarked, finally breaking the quiet. A simple statement, yet laden with layers of understanding. I nodded, acutely, aware of the irony. How days like this, so seemingly perfect on the outside, could house storms beneath their tranquil facades. The lake glittered in response, each ripple a reminder of the unseen depths of ownership and the quiet power it wielded. The neighborhood was changing, its once predictable rhythms now a dance of uncertainty and intrigue. I could feel it in the way the air felt heavier, charged with the electricity of the unknown, in the way people paused before speaking as if measuring their words on invisible scales. Karen's absence spoke louder than any argument she might have presented, her silence an unexpected twist in the tale. It was a retreat perhaps not of defeat, but of strategic reconsideration. Her ambitions, once a force of nature, now seemed to wane, a tide receding to gather strength, or perhaps to seek a new direction. I stood there, a silent guardian of my domain, contemplating the delicate balance of power and community. Life was composed of moments like these where decisions were not always made but allowed to unfold. The moon would tug at the tides, and the lake would remain constant in knowing a witness to it all, a witness to it. And so would I. The morning light filtered through the blinds, painting the living room in soft hues of gold and warmth. It was quiet, too quiet, almost serene. A stark contrast to the clamor of recent events. I sipped my coffee, inhaling deeply as the steam curled up, a comforting ritual in the chaos. Karen had spun. Karen, with her clipboard of righteousness and a voice sharp enough to cut through any neighborly pleasantries, had orchestrated her own downfall with a fervor only she could muster. In her quest to enforce the HOA bylaws with the zeal of a crusader, she had overlooked one crucial detail: the ownership of the very ground on which she stood so defiantly. The lake, a sprawling mirror of sky and land, was mine, as was the launch ramp she threatened to police, both gifted to me through a lineage that valued nature and freedom over rules and petty power plays. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was a legacy of quiet rebellion, a testament to living life on one's terms. I moved deliberately, with the patience of a chess player setting up an inevitable checkmate. My steps traced a path to the study where papers lay in orderly stacks, the legal documentation of the land's boundaries and rights. The power resided not in the paper itself, but in the quiet strength of ownership, a silent reminder of the real levers of control. A few calls, some emails, courteous, precise. The attorney, a silver-haired gentleman with a voice like aged whiskey, understood the landscape of power and quiet retribution. We exchanged pleasantries, the subtext of our conversation laden with the knowledge of the inevitable. Outside, the lake shimmered, a tranquil witness to the unfolding drama. It had seen generations come and go, their troubles and triumphs, mere ripples on its surface. I watched as ducks glided effortlessly across the water, their calmness a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Karen's world. Later, as the sun dipped low, casting the lake in a warm, amber glow, the HOA board gathered for their monthly meeting. The air buzzed with anticipation, a low hum of expectation. Karen, ever the self-appointed sentinel, began her litany of grievances. Her voice carried over the gathering, shrill and demanding. Her moment of reckoning arrived with an elegance that belied its weight. The attorney present, as my silent emissary, met her gaze with a calm authority. His words were few, but landed with the impact of a well-aimed stone. One line was all it took to shatter the illusion. "Perhaps you should check who owns the lake." The room fell silent, the weight of realization settling like a heavy fog. Karen's expression, a portrait of disbelief, shifted through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, anger, humiliation. The irony was rich, its taste bittersweet on the tongue. The meeting adjourned, members dispersing with whispers that rippled into the night. Karen, her bravado deflated, lingered by the door, her figure silhouetted against the fading light. I watched from a distance, an observer to her private unraveling. In the days that followed, the lake returned to its natural rhythm. Karen's reign of petty tyranny faded into memory, a cautionary tale for those who sought power without understanding its source. My boat remained unbothered at the launch, a sentinel of freedom and quiet defiance. And I, content with the outcome, resumed my mornings by the lake. The water, ever constant, reflected the sky's whims and my own quiet satisfaction. The true power lay in knowing when to act and when to let nature take its course. I stood on the shore, the lake a mirror of morning stillness reflecting both sky and soul. The water had always been a canvas of calm, but today it sang a story of triumph, a quiet personal revolution. The community was gathering, drawn by curiosity, or perhaps the magnetic pull of justice restored. The air was ripe with anticipation, a taut string ready to be plucked. Karen, ever the queen without a kingdom, stood at the fringe of the crowd. Her eyes, once a storm, now carried the weight of muted realization. She was sidelined, a chess piece fallen in a game she didn't know had begun. Her threats to tow my boat had been a symphony of arrogance notes that clashed with the harmony of this place. Yet irony's hand had turned the melody. The irony was thick, almost sweet. She had tried to claim dominion over a realm that was never hers. Her clipboard, her lists, her demands, paper boats in a sea she never understood. I owned the lake, the launch ramp, the very ground where she had planted her flag of self-righteousness. Her power once. A tidal wave, now a mere ripple on the surface of reality. The community watched, eyes flickering between us. They waited for a resolution, a final act in this unwritten play. The tension was a living thing, breathing with each heartbeat, ready to exhale truth. A truth that did not need to be spoken. It was woven into the rustle of leaves, the gentle lap of water against the shore. Karen shifted the weight of her clipboard, suddenly an anchor in her hands. I could see the calculations behind her eyes, the slow comprehension that her kingdom was nothing more than sand castles against the tide. She had been dethroned not by anger or vengeance, but by the quiet, irresistible force of ownership. Ownership. It was not just about deeds and papers. It was about belonging, about understanding the language of the place. I had listened to the whispers of the water, the stories of the wind. This was my home, and I had let it speak for itself. The ripples of our earlier confrontation had settled. Now, the water was calm again, a slate wiped clean. The community would return to its rhythm, the pulse of life uninterrupted by the chaos that had briefly disrupted it. Karen, once the self-appointed arbiter of rules and regulations, found herself on the outside looking in, a spectator in a game where she had once claimed to be the referee. In the end, there were no words left to share, just the silence of understanding, the serene acceptance of a new order. She turned away the weight of her own hubris, heavy on her shoulders. The community dispersed slowly, like leaves carried away by an unseen current, their steps guided by the invisible thread of shared experience and newfound clarity. The lake remained eternal and unchanging, cradling the stories of all who lived beside it. I stood alone at the shore, feeling not victorious, but at peace. The water lapped gently at my feet, a silent promise that harmony had been restored. And in that moment, I knew the lake would always be mine, not through ownership, but through love.